Everyone who listens to these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a stupid man who built his house on sand. We who have to do with the discernment of vocations, following people through, know that this is a problem in our day. The solid rock on which things could be built simply isn't there quite often. Whether it be a novice master or just somebody listening to those who are trying to find their way, the same problem tends to emerge. The solid bedrock of a stable family and the solid structure, therefore, of a psychological makeup anchored in lifelong decisions kept often is not easy to trace. Often they're coming from already a damaged background which has led to emotional insecurity, and they're not used to seeing people keeping at a lifelong decision. Indeed, it applies also to those affronting marriage. The same problem emerges, that essentially of giving it a try, ad experimentum, and if it doesn't work out, there's always a plan B. Well, it's not the best way to start on a vocational journey. With regard to this, it's also going to make it very difficult for young people now either to assume a lifelong commitment in marriage or a lifelong commitment in obedience and chastity. The notion actually causes a certain fear, and one follows people through in a process of discernment, sometimes for years on end, and they're still discerning. Whereas classically it doesn't quite work like that. Normally the vocation comes not from the person himself, but from the Holy Spirit. And it's the process then of discerning, not by the person himself so much as by those responsible in the name of that same Holy Spirit, whether or not that call is from God. Therefore the dynamic is now completely overturned and man is in control. Add to that the notion that one can, as it were, program vocations, and we're in serious trouble, because one might initially attract people by all kinds of gimmicks, but then find that the call has come precisely again from man, fragile and lacking in depth. In the East, they have a different approach. There is a big distinction between those who opt for the monastic life and those who opt for parish priesthood. Already that choice is important for a secondary cause. Those who opt for the monastic life do not exclude also the possibility of eventual consecration as bishops, whereas those in the East who opt for being parish priests also exclude anything else. They can never be ordained bishops. Hence, there is a big difference already in the outworking of that on the level of the Eastern Church with regard to the spirituality that pervades. Because the model that we have there is only celibate bishops, and in practice, therefore, all the bishops are coming from the source of celibate priests, the monasteries. And in practice, in the East, we have a heavily monasticized episcopacy, which doesn't do any harm. Because in practice, the way that a spirit might move a good and holy monk is not the same as that which might be moving people in a very modernized seminary in the West. In the East, they're exposed, yes, to good theology in their formation in the monastic world, and they'd be sent also quite often for specialization of study, but over their period of long monastic formation, what is actually happening is the Holy Spirit himself is becoming the interior master. Why? Because in the East, the liturgy is the great educator. and it is the locus of encounter. You place yourself in a whole monastic structure where massively very long periods, hours actually, are given, even on a daily basis, to that kind of liturgy, completely vertical and not horizontal, mystical and other, then there is a chance that that Spirit of God will actually be the interior master. Why? It's a situation where, for long periods of time, we're talking here about kind of 3 hours at a time, the soul is directly defenseless before its creator. There is nothing human in the way, there is no human contact. It is actually a very favorable point of encounter where the Lord, over a long, calm, notice, calm period, can work directly on the soul, can call and instruct and give his own light. Because what happens is this, and there's a term for it, there is a stillness coming in, hesychia. Hesychia means silence in Greek, but it has far more. It has connotations of a calming between man and God, which allows man to pick God up and all he's trying to say. Now that's going to form people on a deep, deep level. You're going to get people then coming from those long years of formation in profound, intimate contact with their king, who will therefore, when it comes to communicating that, if they're made bishops, be not inclined to do anything but what they have received. If it's not broken, don't fix it. So we don't even have, in the slightest way, the contamination of liturgy. They wouldn't even dream of it, because liturgy for them is divine and received, and they have no right over it. It's not fabricated or up for grabs. Therefore, what's going to happen is this. They're not going to waste their time trying to invent new things which will have gimmicky effects, but no long-term effects. They're going to be, if they possibly can, just sources of encounter as mystagogues. They will be experts not at inventing, but at leading. Leading, like Moses, into a cloud of glory. And that is what is lacking in the West. And we're trying to fill that vacuum by gimmicks. And therefore add to that the instability of the human soul in the West. We're in trouble. Now, with regard to the other side of the Eastern spirituality, it works in a different way. Those who opt for becoming parish priests traditionally come from a long heritage of parish priests within a family, because precisely before ordination, not after, they are expected to be married, and there's a point when they have to make a choice before ordination. In practice, they're expected to marry, and the person they marry must also have a vocation. They call her the presbytera. And it's not any person. She has to be a very special person and very strict rules to follow. And so from there will come quite often the next generation of priests for the parish. That's how it works. We had actually, as it happens, something fairly similar to that until recent times with the Anglican Communion in England. Quite often you'd have a system there also of, as it were, a caste of clergy. My best friend in school and college days was one in question, son of a vicar and son of another vicar and so on. It worked because they were formed. Now, in the Latin Rite, we have, through a special gift, maintained the close bond between celibacy and exclusive love and availability there and the priesthood itself. The exceptions being those in our day who come, for instance, from an Anglican situation, and by now also those who can be married and be ordained deacons, but if the wife dies, they remain their widowers. A major order is received, but another order is not received after it. So that has led to the great gift that we have in the West of total availability of the priests. The only thing is that when one compares the end product of bishops being selected from that, compared with the process in the East, where they're coming from the monastic world because they have to, and there we have the problem emerging. Why? The criteria will be quite different in the West. They will be not necessarily looking for people coming from profound contemplation who are able to transmit a spirituality, but people who have shown their qualities as great administrators on a parish level, often from very big parish areas, who are good at getting things going. But if one scratches, one might find that to do that well, certain things en route have been jettisoned, such as a profound prayer life. Because on paper, they're looking for certain things, efficacy. But there's a problem. Because if in the West we're contaminated, for instance, by activism, because priests now are very good when they're very effective, and that means being very busy at everything, including spending much time in social communication, producing bulletins and everything very well on a computer. Now, time is going somewhere. That's not the same as that same time going into contemplative prayer, which we have in the monastic life in the East, leading therefore to bishops coming from that. It's a very different mode of being effective. And who is in command? Is it the same Spirit of God? Now, when it comes therefore to the question of discerning vocations, it's a problem, because that same thing is there. People who are very good at certain things professionally might not be formed in the same depth of contemplation. And therefore, if they enter after already professional life into a seminary, as they tend to nowadays, not straight from early days, they're going to be catching up on lost time, and they might not do it so easily. Add to that by now, the more they've been around, the more they've seen, and the more active they are, and also quite often the more contaminated they are. They've got baggage. It's going to lead to problems later on. Where do I end? This is a day when we think about precisely the church with its two lungs, which St John Paul II was praying hard would be healed and united. We need the East and they need us. And by the way, it's not healthy in our ecumenical dialogue to think exclusively of what has come out of us, the Protestants, because they're even more contaminated. What we need is to look back to our roots and see what we have in common. The Spirit of God can't get through the contamination and illness of activism. He is looking for souls who know Him through prayer.